Because we're looking into this issue of kind of the demonic side of things. A lot of us didn't grow up in churches that even addressed it or dealt with it. I know in seminary they certainly did not talk about, what if you have someone manifest on you, how do you deal with that? And in the world we are living in today, right now, when you have people that are steeped in some of these occultic things, the stuff that's available on the internet, movies, it's like indoctrinated from the kids' shows on up, magic, witchcraft, there's all kinds of stuff that we can, drugs, you name it, people are very much in bondage in these areas, and I believe we're going to start seeing a harvest after the 2020 stuff that's gone on. God is already starting to bring that harvest in. So we are in the preparation phase to receive all these people, and if they've got a bunch of junk, and you have a bunch of manifestation, and you don't know how to handle it, either they're going to stay in bondage and you're just going to, maybe they're redeemed in their spirit, they're seeking God, but they could be going through hell on earth, because the devil might not be able to take them eternally, but he's certainly not going to make it comfortable now. And God gave us life for now, not just the world to come. And so we're looking at, and so this particular article, the reason I want to bring this up and then open it up to discussion is because when I first started investigating this, and obviously as a nerdy academic, I want to dig in the weeds and find out, well, what does it really say about this topic? Because we've never really studied it. And I did get online and do some, kind of look at some other people's courses to kind of just get a start. And this was one of the first verses that popped up to me that I dug in a little deeper, and I want to share that insight with you because one of the problems I'm seeing between the academic community and between us, us that are open to the moving of the Spirit, the things of the Spirit, the gifts of the Spirit, when you try to blend these two worlds, there's a lot of misunderstanding because there's a lot of miscommunication. So, for example, everybody tries to tiptoe around the idea, can a Christian have a demon? And what does that mean? And what do we mean even when we imply that? Because our experience can be very different from some of the just tiptoeing around this whole concept, and then, well, what do I mean? Or, oh my gosh, I don't want to say that because, light and darkness can't be in the same place. And I'll say, well, yeah, but when we kind of understand, if any of you have read Watchman Nee, have any of you familiar with Watchman Nee? Are you familiar with this leader? So Watchman Nee, he was I want to say, was he in China? Somewhere in Asia area. But he suffered. He learned just a deep place with God through suffering, right? And so he has books after books that they've translated into English now that a lot of people are familiar with, but he just goes into this depth of the Spirit type stuff and brokenness and things of this nature. Anyway, long story short, when you have the body, soul, and spirit, we understand that. Paul talks and separates those, right? So in the inner man, and a lot of times if you, I think it's cardia, and because we get that cardiac arrest, we get from the Greek, but heart, lev, in Hebrew, right? We have, almost sounds like love, right? Lev for heart in English, like the wordplay there. The heart, and if you a lot of times put spirit and you exchange it for when we're talking about the heart, it's usually talking about the stuff of the inner man. I've noticed a pattern there. Now, not every Bible uses the same words, it doesn't translate the same words, but generally when it uses heart, it's usually talking about the inner man, that place of decision in terms of your spirit. So the inner man, the spirit of a man, because we're three parts, right? So that part gets redeemed. But let's face it, I don't know if any of you and those of us that are older, you realize real quick, I haven't got my glorified body yet. I'm definitely aware of that, right? This body is still, for all practical purposes, experiencing the fruit of death of our parents, Adam and Chava, right? Adam and Eve. Yes? So that's still under a curse to a degree in the sense that this body is meant to be sown in death. So God's truth is absolute on that thing. This thing is to be sown. Just like the Son was sowed that body, we will sow this body, right? So Paul talks about it as a body of death, right? And so because it's this body of death that will be sown, notice nobody has a problem when somebody's sick, like physical ailment, right? Everybody's fine with the Christian having a physical ailment. But man, when you get into the soul, the realm of the soul, and when you start getting into language, you start to see the whole thing of blood and where soul, the concepts, and when you get into philosophy even, when the kind of Christian philosophers talk about the realm of the soul and the different ideas about that. Well, and with the blood, like when you have, so my husband here, Chris, and we get together and we create a child, and there's like, they almost have a different combination of the two of our bloodlines, right? And so there's this thing with the soul that is carried in the blood. And you think about kind of the different things that blood has and what it is, and then the biblical concepts in your mind just starts to blow. Salty, there's water, you know, it carries, you know, information. I mean, there's so many things. Like you can rabbit trail forever on that, right? Yeah. So we have the realm of the soul. Your mind, think of your mind, your will, and emotions. And Watchman Nee has a lot if you want to read on kind of that tripartite, like 3 different aspects of man. So you have the mind, the will, and the emotions, right, for the soul realm, the realm. Now we say in the Hebrew it's nephesh, right? Okay, so nephesh is, in different contexts will dictate, of course, like is it talking about the whole person, like body, soul, and spirit, or is it talking about just something related to the soul? So you got to have a context, of course. But you have the soul realm. So this is where we have the mental, emotional, and traumas and things like that, right? This is and what we're going to see here in the text that we're going to look at is Matthew 4:24. And so it says, let's see, did I have it? Yeah, I have it here. If you go to Matthew 4:24, it says and this is on the beginning, so you've got it for you. The news about him spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all who were ill. So depending on, you could look at different translations, and ill is, you know, it might use other sickness or, you know, it might use other words. Probably most of them use ill or illness or some kind of ill. They were ill. Okay, so in English, we'll look at what that word is. And so ill, people were ill that he's bringing, right? And then what does it classify under that? So like, okay, here's illness. What kinds of illnesses? Now he's going to list different kinds of things that they're ill. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it could be those suffering with various diseases and pains, you could say, or torments. Demoniacs, epileptics, which may or may not be the actual, like what we think of today, epilepsy, but could be. And then paralytics. So like if you blew out your knee and you can't walk anymore, you know, something like that. Or your back or whatever. And he healed them. Okay, so what jumped out at me immediately, because I'm actually, like my glasses are looking for this topic, so I'm really like, wait a minute. Illness includes demoniacs. That's a type of illness. As far as the sentence structure is going, because it says, they brought him all who were ill, i.e. those suffering from, and it lists these 5 different kind of categories, right? You've got physical like ailments, you've got things to do with disease and like maybe bacterial infections and things of that nature, right? Or viruses, or bloodline, genetic, right? Things that you have with genetics, like our family has a problem of absorbing B12 because we had a genetic marker that got messed up somewhere. So we have a harder time. You got to get B injections occasionally as you get older and stuff like that. So it can be different types of diseases and pains and torments, right? And it says diseases and pains, and we're going to look at each one. And then demoniacs, epileptics, paralytics. So if I broke this sentence down for you, word for word, and I've highlighted here, the word for evil or illness can also be translated evil. That's interesting, isn't it? So illness could be translated evil, kakos, which kind of sounds like a funny word, right? Kakos. And so they having kakos, I even laugh when I say it, like, which is silly. But having an illness or having evil, so it's almost like if you translate that evil, it was like, well, a disease is evil, but why is Why do you think disease is considered, or illness, evil?
Destroy.
Yeah, it's bringing death. It's like a bacterial. Think of a bacteria and what it does, right? It comes and takes this little host, right, and then it sucks them dry and then like leaves them for dead. You know, like it just abuses them and tries to take from them, but it doesn't give back, right? It has these certain characteristics. So let's look at the first significant word then for the kakos here, and I've broken down from the Logos software. It gives you the word, and then it shows you the color ring there. That actually shows you some of the different. If you in my software, if you press on the different bars for the different colors, you can actually see what verses that particular translation is translated in that way. Because not all of them use the same English words, and they're not always consistent. So sometimes you have to go and understand what's behind there. And so as we look at this term, then you have, what's interesting here, I took it a step further. So basically, a couple hundred years before Messiah was born, they took the Hebrew scriptures and they translated it into Greek, because that was the common tongue of the times. Like, everybody has English pretty much around the world, at least, right? Because we're kind of the common tongue, right? And so they did the Greek, and so it was sort of there wasn't any bias yet, anti-Jesus, right? There wasn't any anti-Jesus bias in the text yet. So what I went is I looked in, it's called the LXX, or the Septuagint. So if you see LXX, that just means Septuagint. It's basically the Greek version of the Hebrew scriptures. And there was, interestingly, 3 terms, and I have them here in the little wheel on page 2. In the little wheel, there's 3 Hebrew terms that they taken this word kakos, illness, and they used that word, that Greek word, to translate 3 different Hebrew terms in the Hebrew scriptures. And what was interesting, if you look at what they meant, so the first one is kuf lamed lamed. Okay, so that's the root. It's just showing you the root, obviously, in a sense. They'll have it conjugate and whatever. But it meant curse or cursed, used 41 of 82 times in the NASB for that, with the kuf lamed lamed. The second Hebrew root that was used for this is the aleph resh resh, which is another root for the concept of binding with a curse. That's pretty provocative. And then the final one was chet lamed hey, and that root for weakness, illness, sickness, feelings of pain, things we commonly think of when we use the modern English illness, right? That's what we usually think. But it's interesting because when you understand the concept of a curse, now it's like, wait a minute, think back. So illness, well, we know illness and death is based on a curse, right? It goes back to Adam and Eve, right? But then we can do other things, we can open the door. So demoniacs is in this same department of curse, because obviously, it makes sense, right? You've opened the door to the demonic, and they've walked on, and you've put yourself under a curse, and to some degree, because usually what that means is you come in agreement with a lie, because what did Adam and Eve do? So it's really that simple. We come in agreement with a lie, we come under a curse. What did the law bring? Right? It revealed that. So it was a grace, but there's a greater grace, right? The law was a grace, but there's a greater grace in Messiah. He got rid of it, all the curses, right? Now we're free. But there was this revealing of, hey, while I'm going to send the Son to redeem you so you can access the heavenly realm, he said, the law here is to show you, this is so you can have a long life. Long, healthy, blessed life, not cursed, right?
Amen.
So when we come in agreement with a lie, we come under a curse, we put ourselves there, and we have the freedom to not be under that. We can turn, repent, right? Immediate forgiveness, and we can cast that out, that kind of thing. But when you start seeing these concepts, it's much more, this isn't so complicated, but look how integrated it is, and yet it's simple, but it's not easy, right? So then, and I won't read all this, you'll be able to read some of these key points, but we clearly know that it's not limited to the flesh or physical medical ailments. That's kind of our first major thing we just need to understand, is that illness is not just physical. It's also mental, emotional, spiritual, and that includes demoniacs, or being demonically attacked, if you will, because sometimes it can be from without, harassment. But sometimes you've opened a door. Maybe you had an affair. Maybe you were doing some other sexual perversion. Usually that's the one that we don't get, like in this culture right now, like people watching porn, whatever. You've opened the door, and that demon has come and has access to the soul realm, which is what? The bloodline, your blood realm. It's the realm of the soul, right? Your body. We get a trauma, right? And we know that trauma gets, like, what do you do when you're, like me, I was really stressing. Is stress a sin? Is anxiety a sin? Oh yeah. And what happened? It went right to my shoulders. And my shoulders got tight as the dickens. And then I had a kink the next morning, and I was like, oh. Now that's like baby thing, right? But it can have an impact when I'm not to carry this. I'm not to carry the stress of like different things. But what do? We worry instead of giving it to Him. And what happens? It manifests in our body, and the devil will exploit that, right? So there's that level, but because we're believers, the demonic cannot touch your spirit. It has to bow the knee. But you can certainly open the door. If we overindulge anything, right? Whatever it is, too much TV, too much phone, too much food, too much, name it, right? We end up in these two other areas that are illnesses, but it's the devil's playground, and he will exploit it. So we can also get more wise in how we deal with it, right? Exactly. So part of winning this battle is exposure. As baby steps as I've gone in this department, that is it. Calling it out and seeing it, you can now get victory over it because it can't manipulate. That's probably the hardest one, is not knowing how you're being manipulated, not knowing your enemy. So as you get more wise of seeing how he provokes you, like if something keeps setting you off, you're like, whoa, what? It's like, step back. What keeps making me lose my witness, if you will? I'm pretty much like, there were certain things, I know my family is a witness, like people smoking where they shouldn't sort of made me lose my witness. Just tiny bit. I've gotten better. Yeah, that one used to, like, in a hotel room, on a floor, in front of a sign that says no smoking. Like that one, pretty much, I lost my witness on that one. Whew. Yeah. But, like, the devil likes to poke, right? He likes to provoke us so that then he can accuse us. And then we just get into a cycle of, like, what, right? Self-hatred coming. He just, like, right? We just have to get smarter. So this is the training ground. What is his strategies? How is he messing with us? And then how can we recognize that and battle back? And so we can also educate the next generation so they can go lay hands on people and have victory and not get all the stuff that we had to deal with growing up, right? So I want, like I said, I'm not going to read all this because I want to get to the question and answer, but you can go back and now look at this. Oh, do look on page 3 real quick. So the word, what about healing people of these ills in the middle of the page, as a significant and constant part of his daily ministry activities. And he later sent his disciples, whom he was training and raising up to be able to train others, to do the very same thing, sending them out in groups of 2 with the specific instructions to do what? Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons, freely receive, freely give. I'm sorry, very few churches teach how to do this. I went to seminary. I was not taught how to do this. I went all the way, doctoral level. They never addressed this. Like how? Okay, how do you heal the sick? He said heal the sick. Okay, now there's doctors for some things, and they're very gifted. Surgeons, my husband's knee. Bless God for the surgeons. But there's certain things on that list of illnesses that are spiritual in nature and cannot be just by natural means, right? So there's some natural means and there's some supernatural means. And so there's going to be warfare and there's going to be solutions on both of those types of ways and means, right? Casting out demons. Okay. One of the interesting things I've noticed is what Jimmy said first, identifying. The minute you called it out, one of the demons I literally physically saw, like manifest physically, like I visibly saw it come out of the person, growl at me and leave. It was because I called it out. I didn't even mean to. It was sort of an accident. Like I just went, oh, what do you mean, masonry? And it manifested. And I was all, whoa, okay. I was not expecting that. But it's because, and my thought at the time, even though I knew nothing else about demonic realm, nothing, was that thing got mad. Because it's like he was talking and it clenched his jaw shut like this. He just went like kind of this catatonic, like nothing. As we were talking a mile a minute, and then nothing. It was like, and this thing manifests, and I was like, my heart was going like this. I was like, what did I just see? Because I was clearly not expecting to say that. But my thought at the time was like, okay, I have authority in the Lord. I know what to pray now. That was the first thought I had. I know what to pray against now. This is masonry. This is a demonic thing related to masonry. I know what to pray. And I think he was mad. Because what he had said, he was kind of being vague about recruiting people for a club and stuff. And he was a former military, and he liked to talk war stories with me. He just had, former military stuff to talk about, he just, that's the kind of conversations. And so I was like, oh, you're recruiting? Well, what do you mean? And the way he was like, and what he said that clued me was he said, and this is what I think the demon got mad about. He's all, yeah, we were going to recruit this guy, but they told me he was Jewish and he wouldn't take the oath. And that's when I went, oh, what do you mean? Masonry? And I turned, and his jaw clenched shut, and then the thing turned like out of him. It like literally physically appeared. It growled at me, and then it kind of dissipated like that. And I was just like, what just happened? But that was my thought even back then, and now I'm thinking, well, that makes sense. So part of it's calling it out because they hide. Our culture, this is the biggest problem. Every other culture almost around the world, dealing in the supernatural is common every day. No big deal. Like, that's just part of, oh yeah, that's no big deal. Like, but a lot of it's because they're much more into open, blatant witchcraft, open, blatant, go to India, they have shrines, they have, you have, from all the Elohim, little Elohim. We talked about that a little bit before. So, in the Bible, we have the word Elohim. We usually think for God, and we translate that for God, right? And we had talked about how at the Tower of Babel, the sons, when God split the languages, he made the borders of the peoples of the nations, and they have the table of 70 or 72, depending on how they class the four of them, like either together or apart. Anyway. So he basically divorced the nations for a while. And then remember he divorces the 10 northern tribes, but now he welcomed the lost sheep, and then he welcomed back the nations. At the Acts 2. We just recently had Pentecost, right? So he's welcoming them back. So at that time, he put them under the rule of the little Elohim, right? And basically what that meant, it wasn't gods in the sense of the attributes of God that we think of, big G-O-D. So we usually tie that to that. It was the simple, spiritual entities, principalities and powers, Paul might say, right? So that's who was, where we get all this paganism and things that developed because they started worshiping those gods, those spiritual entities that were teaching men the war and doing all this horrible stuff, right? Still doing it today, as a matter of fact. So, anyway, I want to get to the questions. You'll see that there's the different words. I broke it down for you on page 4. It says, for the diseases, you have the main term, and then in the Greek, on the first one, and then it shows you, the Septuagint shows you all the different Hebrew terms, and then underneath it in English, it'll show you what those terms, how they were translated. And then also, notice for underneath that, page 4, it has pains, torments, or tortures, apparently related to guilt, insult, or hindrance. So think about this. If you have a guilty conscience, right? We use the term, there's actually guilt and shame should be clarified, and we don't use it properly. Guilt is, you're guilty. If you did something wrong, if you sinned, you're guilty. It just is. You're just guilty. We're all guilty of sin. That's just a fact. All human beings, right? But shame is different. Shame's your internal, oh, don't do that, right? But when the devil manipulates us with the shame, it puts us in bondage, right? Instead of, and then we're trapped and we get in a shame cycle, right? And we can't get out of it. And we call that like, you have a guilty conscience, right? But if you have a guilty conscience, it'll eat you up. You will physically manifest in your body some way the guilt and shame that you carry around on your back because you haven't offered it up, right? And so it's interesting that that this Greek term that translated pains could mean torments, which in a demoniac concept is a demon literally tormenting you with evil, intrusive thoughts, whatever, right? And so the language is there, but it's relating to guilt. So in that term, the pains and torments are specifically tied to guilt, a guilty conscience, carrying shame you shouldn't carry, right? And so that gives you a little more depth. And then, of course, the actual term here is the whole word demonizomai. Demonion, I think, is like the shorter version, but here it's that. And it's demonized. So we don't really have a good term we don't have these, and this is where we play the dance and the game with everybody of like, can a Christian have a demon, can it not? Well, yes and no. Like, can you come in agreement with a lie? Then you can entertain a demon. And to what degree you understand that, it can manifest in your body, and literally, we've watched people be delivered, and I wouldn't cast a demon out of a person who wasn't confessing the Lord anyway, because they're just going to be worse off. They'll just bring something back, right? So they have to be, but we do see that, and it's later on in this, I talk about it so you can read it later, but anyway, so let's get to page 6, present age hope of deliverance, not just the age to come. So I already talked about a little bit about this. If you're looking at these issues, we have epileptic, paralytic, those things, and it shows you that those things, these things relate to the present age, because we're still in bodies of death, which means we still have to deal with choosing life or choosing death. Coming in, like being, the minute you stand in agreement with a lie, ignorant or otherwise, you open the door for demonic attack. Doesn't mean a demon always comes, because obviously they have limited troops. Everything we do is going to manifest in a demon, but that's an open door, right? So if he wants to come screw with you, he can, essentially, right? And so the church today is okay to pray for healing, but not demonic related most of the time. So praying for and addressing the physical or biological ills, as I've said, we already talked about that. I get into a little bit more here. Q&A. So let's talk about this. What is your reaction to the deeper insight initially? And if somebody, we can pass this around if you want to, so everyone can hear. And who's got the mic? Anybody want to respond to that? What is your thoughts at kind of thinking deeper about these things? Nikki? All right.
I guess I just found it really interesting because I always thought of like healing the sick as the physical, not even like the spiritual, emotional. I never thought of it like that, so I thought that was pretty interesting.
Okay, cool. Anyone else have a comment? All right, next question. Have you dealt with or are you still dealing with any soul wounds yourself? Or maybe an illness? Or demonic attacks or possession either now or in the past? Does anybody have a short story they'd be comfortable sharing about dealing with any of this? Okay.
I don't have any illnesses, praise God.
Amen.
But if any of you guys are like me sometimes, I know you kind of talked a little bit about it, dealing with anxiety once in a while. I've known about it for years now. That little whisper that comes into your head. You're going to get this, you're going to get that.
Oh, yeah.
And I learned a lot about it in the past about, okay, those are spirits trying to whisper into your brain. And when you believe those, that's when the lie comes in and we accept the lie and it's a sin. And when you accept it and you believe it, then the fear, you get nailed with the fear dart.
Right.
We've all gone, a lot of people have, there's people that are like, oh, I didn't know that. So It's just our ways we can help people, you know. So I'm in the same boat. We're going to get hit harder because we're Christians than the people that aren't saved because he didn't like us, you know. So that was my little story.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have anything, an experience or something, comment on that? With the anxiety, I'll piggyback off what he was saying. The kids were little, I had this weird pass out incident, the ambulance came, they had to take me, they didn't know what was going on. And now looking back, I'm like, whoa, it was like a combination of physical ailment and spiritual attack, demonic. I didn't even know it then. Now I look back and I'm like, oh wow, yeah, that was really a demonic attack. On different levels, but the anxiety that produced from the trauma of it, and then not being able to sleep, because I had like massive, where I could not sleep, and I couldn't breathe, which was part of it. That kind of helps when you can breathe, you can't, like, or if you can't breathe, you can't relax enough to sleep, so then you're more anxious, and then the more anxious you are, then you, like, it's a cycle.
The more you can't breathe.
The more you can't breathe, yeah. But sometimes I literally, and this was kind of the demonic level too, is I would wake up with those night terrors, because when I was awake, I could battle with my mind and take, the word and be like, okay, I can think it through, I can intellectually work work it out. But when I was asleep, it's like you felt more vulnerable. So I would wake up and already be in the middle of a panic attack from my sleep. So when you come up and your body, because my body, and they explained it at, we ended up at National Jewish, which is the #1 lung hospital in Colorado, in the country, and they finally figured out I had this kind of weird version of asthma and whatever that didn't manifest always the same as most of them. It's like called dynamic hyperinflation, where it kind of like holds the air, and the sacs don't like release all the air, so you kind of feel like a balloon that I can't fill up, and so I would yawn and try to like get more air in. I really think there was a combination of that and a Python type spirit that was like literally trying to just choke the air and life and ministry right out of me, all kind of worked up in one. But the level, I'm so thankful for that whole season, even though it was total heck, because when I was, one time I hadn't slept in over 3 days. And as a Marine, you learn not to sleep, but after 3 days, you'll start getting kooky. You'll be like, someone just punched me and knocked me out right now because I need to sleep. And I'm like, just give me a pill, anything, and then you gotta get off that, and it was horrible. And so I'm so thankful for that season, because when we got here to COVID, and that thing left China, and I had to have that, am I gonna trust God and put all my eggs in that basket and just keep living? Or am I gonna let fear take over? It was like, all eggs in that basket. I already had gone through the preparation of, am I going to wake up tomorrow? Can I even go to sleep? Because I would hold on because I didn't want to leave the girls, I'm like, sorry, it takes me right back to when they were little. And you're just like, they're so, you don't want to leave them, they're vulnerable, they're little, and you're just like, oh my gosh, will I stop breathing? Or, and you think like that. And so the fact that this particular virus attacked the lungs was like 1,000 times more scary, because I know how hard it is not to breathe for a long period, where every breath is a struggle. And I had to learn to trust him for every stinking breath, and just be like, that's your ruach. The word breath is ruach in Hebrew. And it means wind or breath, right? It's the breath, and it's his literal breath. That's the spirit in us. When our breath leaves, our spirit leaves, right? And so when you have to get to that level where every breath, you have to have faith for every breath, it increases your level of faith, just like
exponentially.
You're like, so I was so thankful, because we needed that. I needed that boldness for this season, because otherwise I would have isolated. And what does the enemy like to do? So many people right now are isolated, right? They're afraid to come even to a service like this, or they're afraid, they're so locked in fear and anxiety about even stepping back out, and they want to keep their face covered, right? And they're in terror of it. And there's such freedom. We have the message of freedom, right? Who else would have ever gotten us out of the house without the church? Without believers? Ever. Like, think about how demonic it was, how much this attack was, and on the lungs and the breath and the, like, choking your life out. And now the attack is literally on what is everything always. The pagan stuff was always fertility, and even the covenant, the sign of the covenant was in the male member, right? It was about fertility. But God gave, and remember all the first women who had struggles with what? What did the enemy come against? Their fertility, their ability to reproduce, right? And God is a God of life. And so it's so interesting how what is the next major move? It was like, first it was like Python trying to choke us out and Jezebel control us, and now it's literally coming against the ability of man to even reproduce, period. And trying to just like reduce the population and all this other nonsense, right? So it's crazy. Anyway, sorry, went along there. If it was in the past any of the stuff you had, how did you deal with it, or are you still searching? Has anybody thought of any other things they might want to share on this? How about any questions in this? Do you have something, Jenny?
I was just gonna say I'm still dealing with it, but I just think the exposing it for me has been like the baby steps toward it, recognizing it. So then when I have those thoughts, I'm like, oh, that's pride. I need to resist and humble myself and, surrender to the Lord.
Yeah.
Like, so just exposing, oh, you're being, that's, I have a thought of pride, so I need to work on it or whatever. So just,
good.
that's been helpful, just the thought of recognizing the sin more.
Oh, good. No, that's great. And that's tying into our, was that last week's? Yes, or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
We did one of the verses, the key verses was the principle that then we were looking at another text, but it was the submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee. That's the process. That's the principle. Doesn't matter what you're dealing with these illnesses. Submit to God. What is that? Come in agreement with the truth. Resist the devil. Now I gotta push back, I gotta battle, and he will flee. But what did we see the Lord did? He cast him out. There's hey, leave. So the Lord told him, go. He left, but he had resisted him, right? And we saw the temptation, we were going over that, that's right, the temptation of the Lord and the three different ones and how that paralleled, there was the same principles of each three, right?
Yeah.
So good, Jenny, that was good. So I just wanted to open up, do we have any other just like general questions in this topic? Anything that you might want us to maybe look at as I do more research and things that you're curious about you might want to throw in there? Like, just kind of opening the floor for discussion, anything on this kind of genre that you might have.
I guess I'll bring something else up. We talked about it. I don't even.
Oh, just so they can hear on the live stream.
You mentioned the lie? I think a lot of people are listening to lies with their sexuality out in the world today.
Oh, yeah.
And we talked about it before with all this stuff out there going on, with all this racism stuff they're trying to bring up. To me, I think it's just another lie that's being thrown out there. And it's almost like victimization is becoming, that's like a spirit anymore.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, I just realized earlier today that, I'm like, we got to remember, we're not battling the flesh, we're battling these people that are believing all this stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, they keep bringing it up, and that's kind of like when you were talking about all this, it just kind of brought all that to the surface.
So you mean we're battling principalities and powers behind what's causing the behavior, that the people that are staying in kind of a trauma state, a victim mentality.
Correct.
Yeah, I was just going to have you talk about category, because you always talk about how that category stuff and how their whole goal is to separate us into categories and all that stuff. So.
Oh yeah, okay. So there was a term, I did this last Feast of Tabernacles, they talked a little bit about, it's a term, kind of sounds like categoron, or I can't remember the other term, but categoron is one of the the Greek terms, which kind of sounds like our word category, right? And so they literally, the minute you put somebody in what they want to do, categorize us, right? The whole current trend right now, which is basically like the more kind of perverse and or the more victimized you are, the higher your value and voice, because you're in that, and the more categories you can apply as a victim or whatever, now you're elevated and your voice is elevated, and if you're only in certain categories, you're down here. And so it's like, but what does the enemy do? Divide and conquer, right? And think about that. I mean, that's part of the church's problem, is that kind of the people playing on the wrong team that they don't realize in ignorance. A lot of times all the victims like that, they're victim mentality, they're falling into this thing, but they will excuse each other's behavior and stay a team. And that's actually more powerful, because it's sort of like the Tower of Babel. What did the Lord say in the Tower of Babel? Everything they put their mind to do, they could do, because they were one heart, one mind. It was the wrong one, but it was one, right? It's the power of one heart, one mind. And so if we can learn to appreciate, I was having a conversation just this week with some ladies that we were talking about, because there's sort of how the charismatic versus my kind of academic circles, that when I go to when I go read my paper got accepted to the Society of Biblical Literature this year. So in November when I go, it's a very academic crowd. Versus like when I go to Fresh Start, and it's like super charismatic crowd, right? Or Pentecostal crowd. And I love both crowds. And I like my Reform guys when they're on the streets, pounding the pavement and down at the Capitol and doing great apologetics. But all these people don't understand each other. They don't appreciate each other. It's like the foot and the knee and the elbow. And they're like, you're not like me. And so I want to pray with you because you're not me. And they don't value them. And so we never all get on the same team, because if we could get the elbow and the knee and the foot, if we could get those guys to just appreciate the value that, the Pentecostals bring and the academics, the value that we bring, and if we could get them all in the same, supporting each other and quit tearing each other down, and let God kind of deal with the other stuff and just focus on who you're ministering to and quit spending so much time tearing everyone down, we could do so much more, right? That's my hope.